After retiring from a 40-year career as a county mechanic, he wasn't ready to hang up his tools completely. Instead of selling the large detached garage next to his home, he leased it to the local sheriff's department. Nothing big, just a modest agreement that let deputies store overflow equipment and conduct quiet mechanical work off the county books. The rent helped Dale cover his property taxes, and the badge presence gave him peace of mind. Life, for once, was simple. The neighborhood wasn't bad either. His home sat in one of those sleepy HOA-governed subdivisions built in the late 80s, with faded white fences, aging flower beds, and neighbors who waved but rarely talked. Dale liked it that way. He kept his grass trimmed, didn't play loud music, and stayed out of drama. In return, he asked for nothing but solitude, especially in his twilight years. That all began to change the day a new neighbor named Brenda moved in across the cul-de-sac. She was the type of person who introduced herself with a clipboard, not a handshake. Dale spotted her knocking on doors within hours of the moving truck pulling away. She had a permanent scowl, the kind that etched lines on her face like tree bark, and she wore her HOA badge like a sheriff's star. Ironic, considering Dale was already working with the actual sheriff. For the first few weeks, things remained civil. Brenda's lawn was pristine, her trash bins were labeled, and she kept to herself, but there was something performative about it all. Dale could sense the way she stared at his garage when she walked by, how her head tilted just enough to peek under the slightly cracked roll-up door. She wanted to know what was inside. And Dale had learned long ago that people who can't mind their own business often make it their mission to manage everyone else's. It was a Friday morning when Dale first noticed something was off. He had gone into town for breakfast like he always did, 2 eggs, rye toast, and a side of hash browns at Rita's Diner. When he returned, he paused in his gravel driveway. His garage doors were closed, but something felt different. He pressed the remote, and the roll-up door creaked open. There they were. 2 massive white trucks wedged into his garage like puzzle pieces. Commercial delivery rigs with faded logos, streaked dirt, and oil drips trailing on his sealed concrete floor. They weren't there before. Dale didn't park them, and no one had called to ask if they could. He stood there, blinking for a full minute. The silence of the neighborhood mocked him. Birds chirped. A distant lawn mower buzzed. And inside his own property, inside his own damn garage, sat 2 intruding vehicles like they belonged. It didn't take long for him to find out who they belonged to. Brenda, the neighbor with the clipboard. The woman who had complained to the HOA board about someone else's flower beds being 2 inches out of regulation. She had taken it upon herself to use Dale's garage for her storage, without asking, without a lease, without anything. At first, Dale thought it was a mistake. Maybe a delivery guy got the wrong address. Maybe Brenda rented a similar garage nearby and got mixed up. But when he walked over to her front porch and knocked, she didn't even try to deny it. She just smiled that smug little smile. "Oh, Dale," she said sweetly, "I figured since your garage is so empty most of the time, it wouldn't be a big deal. I only need the space for a couple of weeks. Besides, the HOA encourages neighbors to be cooperative." Dale didn't say a word. He just stared at her, lips pressed tight, heart hammering behind his ribs. That was the moment everything changed. That was the day Dale Hensley, the quiet, polite, grease-stained retiree, realized he was going to war. And as he walked back to his house, passing those 2 oversized trucks sitting like uninvited guests in his garage, a slow grin spread across his face, because Brenda didn't know about the lease. She didn't know that Dale had paperwork signed by the county. She didn't know who she had just messed with, but she was about to find out. I spent the night tossing and turning. I kept replaying Brenda's smug smirk as she waved from my own garage like she owned the place. The audacity of her actions gnawed at me. This wasn't just about inconvenience anymore, it was a matter of principle. The next morning, I got up early, grabbed my thermos, and headed to the sheriff's substation a few miles down the highway. Deputy Martinez greeted me with a raised brow. "Morning, Dale. Trouble at the cabin." I explained the situation carefully. How Brenda had, without any notice or permission, parked 2 oversized trucks in my leased garage. How she now acted like she had the right to do it. I emphasized that the sheriff's office had an active lease on the property, that the garage space was part of the agreement, and that I feared it could interfere with county operations if not handled soon. Deputy Martinez was sympathetic. That's not just rude, it might be trespassing, depending on the circumstances. Let me get the paperwork and check your lease. We spent the next half hour reviewing the agreement. The lease was solid, signed, notarized, and even approved by the HOA 2 years ago when I first offered the space. It clearly granted the county full access to the garage, and it stated that any unauthorized interference would be considered a violation of a government lease. Martinez nodded, impressed. You've got legal ground, Dale. If she tries to argue this, she's going to lose badly. But I wasn't just relying on the law. Brenda had already shown she didn't respect boundaries or rules unless it benefited her. So I decided it was time to gather some additional information, something the HOA had never counted on, me paying attention. I walked the neighborhood that afternoon, clipboard in hand, pretending to take notes on my old truck parked in the driveway. I talked to a few neighbors, subtle conversations, nothing too nosy. Mrs. Kellerman across the street let it slip that Brenda had hosted some sort of landscaping business out of her home for years. She parks those trucks all over, she said, shaking her head. They leak oil on the pavement. My husband called the HOA once. They said it was allowed because she was volunteering for community beautification, but I don't buy it. Aha! Later that evening, I logged into the HOA digital record portal. Took some digging, but I found what I was looking for. At least 6 complaints against Brenda's vehicles in the past 3 years. All dismissed by the board, and guess who signed off on the dismissals? None other than Brenda's friend Lisa Mendoza, the same board secretary who sent me my fine notice the day before. The pieces were coming together fast now. Brenda wasn't just a bad neighbor, she was using her influence in the HOA to skirt around rules everyone else had to follow. Her little truck stunt wasn't just inconsiderate, it was calculated, and I was about to bring that whole house of cards down. The next morning, I stopped by the county office and made a formal report. Not just about the parking dispute, but about the interference with government-leased property. The clerk's eyebrows shot up when she saw the documentation. This could escalate, Mr. Hensley. If you're saying she interfered with government usage of the garage, and there's evidence of recurring pattern, that's not just civil, that's bordering on criminal. I didn't smile, but inside, I'll admit, I felt a little vindicated. By mid-afternoon, Deputy Martinez returned to my property. With him were 2 officers and an official notice from the county, printed in bold red letters. They taped it to the garage door, clearly stating the building was under active government lease, and any unauthorized use would be subject to legal action. Brenda saw them from her front porch. She marched over in slippers and a bathrobe, yelling before she even hit the edge of my lawn. What the hell is going on, Dale? This is harassment. I'm going to report you. Martinez held up his hand. Ma'am, we have a legal lease here. Your vehicles are trespassing. You have 2 hours to remove them. After that, we tow them at your expense. Brenda fumed. This is a conspiracy. You're just trying to make me look bad. I don't have to try, I said calmly. You did that yourself. The trucks were gone within an hour, but the real fun came later that week. A certified letter arrived at my cabin. Another fine from the HOA, this time for intimidation and abuse of emergency services. They claimed I weaponized law enforcement against a neighbor. I had to laugh. So I printed out copies of the lease, the sheriff's notice, and the county's own report of interference, and mailed them. Every single one of the board members got a packet. Brenda's whole operation was unraveling, and she knew it. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. You see, I had just found out something even juicier. While Brenda claimed those trucks were temporary, I discovered they were registered to her son's business. A business not registered with the county, which meant Brenda was hosting a commercial operation on residential property, a major HOA violation, the same HOA that fined people for using the wrong mailbox paint color. Now I had the smoking gun, and in Chapter 3, I'm going to aim it right at the heart of her empire, The next morning, I arrived at the garage a little early, hoping to enjoy a quiet coffee before the workday. Instead, I was greeted by the jarring sight of two massive white trucks still jammed into the space. The front grille of one of them was nearly kissing the back wall, and the other truck had its bumper hanging halfway out the garage door like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. Brenda had done absolutely nothing to move them. I stood there, jaw tight, staring at the monstrosities while my coffee slowly cooled in my hand. This wasn't some overnight mistake. This was intentional. A familiar rumble came up the drive. Deputy Rosales. His cruiser pulled in behind me, and when he stepped out, he didn't even need to ask. She left him in there. Both, I said, pointing. Still here. He walked up to the garage and gave a long whistle. You weren't kidding. She's packed them in like a couple of sardines. Any idea what I should do now? I asked. Well, it's your lease, he said. Technically, you have rights to full access during duty hours. Want me to make a formal complaint? Let's wait. I replied, trying to stay level-headed. Let's try a neighborly knock one more time. We walked over to Brenda's door. She didn't answer at first, but eventually we saw the blinds twitch, and she cracked open the door with a theatrical sigh. Yes, you're going to need to move those trucks, Brenda, I said firmly today. I've already spoken to the HOA, she said smugly. They've approved it. I need them parked somewhere safe while my driveway is getting sealed. Your driveway's been untouched for weeks, Rosale said flatly. Doesn't matter, she snapped. I got approval. That struck me as strange. The HOA doesn't usually move that fast. I decided to do some digging. Back home, I opened the dusty cabinet where I kept all my original property paperwork. Sure enough, the lease agreement from when I handed the garage to the sheriff's department was still in perfect shape. But what really caught my eye was a highlighted line in an HOA document I had tucked away years ago. Properties built before the HOA formation had certain grandfathered exemptions, including, apparently, parking and leasing rights. Interesting. I scanned and emailed a few documents to my lawyer and reached out to an old friend, Miriam, who used to sit on the HOA board. They can't enforce rules on a structure that predates their own formation, she confirmed. Not without rewriting the charter, and good luck getting a 2/3 vote. Armed with that knowledge, I printed out the documents and brought them with me to the next HOA meeting. Brenda was there, sitting front and center like she ran the place. Her smug look slowly drained as I stepped up to the podium and dropped the paperwork. I'm here to address the complaint made against me for improper garage usage, I began. Except, this garage is under a lease with the sheriff's department, and I have the contract here, and I also have a copy of the original deed that clearly states this property and its outbuildings are exempt from any new HOA regulations due to the pre-existing status. Whispers and murmurs rippled through the room. I continued, so either the trucks go or I will begin eviction proceedings under local code. The HOA president, a man named Wallace, looked uncomfortable. We'll need to review this, he mumbled. You've got 48 hours, I replied. After the meeting, Rosale shook my hand. That was masterful. The next day, the trucks were gone, but that wasn't the end, because Brenda wasn't done playing. She began filing nuisance complaints. Noise, oil stains, unauthorized signage, even an accusation that the sheriff's cruiser parked nearby was creating a traffic hazard. It was clearly a coordinated campaign to drown me in paperwork and force me out. But this time I wasn't reacting, I was preparing. With every letter she filed, I documented the inaccuracies. I photographed the garage, my property lines, the local zoning signs. I built a folder, inch by inch, knowing full well the war was just beginning. I wasn't just fighting for the garage anymore. I was fighting to protect the last slice of dignity and fairness I had in a neighborhood being taken over by small tyrants in lawn chairs. And I was just getting started. The sheriff's department had made the lease official. Dale's garage was now a legally recognized substation for the county, and Brenda's little parking trick had gone from a nuisance to an obstruction of justice. When Dale handed over the latest complaint to Deputy Morales, she raised an eyebrow and asked to see the trucks. Sure enough, Brenda had parked two large landscaping vehicles, unlicensed with expired tags, wedged so tightly into Dale's garage that Morales had to squeeze sideways just to inspect them. Morales didn't say much. She took pictures, jotted notes, and promised a report would be filed. Dale didn't smile, but inside, he felt a flicker of satisfaction, not because of revenge, but because he finally had backup. The next morning, things took a turn. Brenda had left a handwritten note taped to his front door. The tone was half accusation, half gaslighting. "You've always been difficult," it read. "No one else on this street makes such a big deal out of sharing." Dale showed it to Morales. She read it once, gave a quiet hem, and slipped it into her folder without a word. Later that afternoon, Dale watched as a tow truck slowly backed into his driveway, escorted by a cruiser. The sheriff's department had ordered the removal of both of Brenda's trucks. Brenda came storming out of her house screaming about civil rights and entrapment, but the officer remained calm, explained that she was in violation of multiple property codes and obstructing an official county operation. Her threats fell on deaf ears, but Dale knew Brenda wouldn't stop there. The very next day he received a visit, not from code enforcement, but from an HOA board member who had barely spoken to him in years. The man seemed hesitant, uneasy. "We've been asked to investigate the terms of your lease," he said. "Some of the board members think you may be operating a business out of your home." Dale knew exactly who was behind it. Brenda had twisted the story again, trying to paint him as a zoning violator. But Dale, ever prepared, pulled out copies of the lease agreement, the county approval letter, and photographs of the substation's minimal footprint. "There's no business here," he said. "Just law enforcement making sure our street stays safe." Word spread fast. Within days, neighbors who had kept quiet for months began stopping by. A few offered kind words. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner. One older couple, whose grandson had gotten a second chance thanks to a sheriff's program, thanked Dale for supporting the department. Another neighbor brought over coffee and said, "You're doing the right thing, man. Don't let them push you around." Dale didn't ask for anyone's loyalty, but the support felt like an invisible shield. Brenda, however, doubled down. She started attending every HOA meeting, dragging her complaints into public comment sessions, trying to stir up fear about militarization and strangers in uniforms. She conveniently left out that her trucks had blocked access to an active sheriff's substation. Dale never responded in kind. He showed up once, calmly clarified the facts, and left. The board, though deeply divided, began to shift. People were tired of the drama. Brenda's pattern, harassment, escalation, lies, was becoming too obvious to ignore, and then came the tipping point. Brenda sent an email blast to the entire neighborhood, falsely claiming that Dale's lease had expired, that the sheriff's department had been kicked out, and that he was now using the garage to store questionable equipment. She attached grainy night photos of the driveway and vague accusations. But this time, she went too far. The sheriff's department responded swiftly with a public statement affirming their lease, condemning misinformation, and reaffirming Dale's integrity. The statement ended with, "We are grateful to Mr. Hensley for his continued cooperation and community spirit." Dale had anticipated that Brenda would retreat quietly after the sheriff's department validated his leasing arrangement. But Brenda was far from finished. In fact, she doubled down, as if humiliated by the fact that law enforcement didn't side with her. Over the next few days, Brenda escalated in petty and calculated ways. She placed trash bags near his property line, blasted country music at all hours, and even walked her dogs right up to his window, just to let them bark for 5 straight minutes. Dale stayed calm. He knew reacting emotionally would play into her narrative, but he couldn't deny that her antics were slowly chipping away at his patience. Things came to a boiling point one evening when Dale returned from town to find fresh tire marks across his gravel driveway, zigzagging like someone had spun out on purpose. A folded piece of paper was taped to his back door. It was a friendly reminder from the HOA that residents were expected to maintain a tidy, safe appearance. The note wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The paper was still warm from Brenda's laser printer. Dale called his friend Roberta, an elderly woman on the HOA board who had lived in the neighborhood for 35 years and remembered a time when it was still just an unpaved cluster of homesteads. She came by the next morning, sipping sweet tea and already shaking her head before she even parked. "They're letting her run the board like it's a dictatorship," she said, glancing at Brenda's yard, now proudly displaying a new surveillance sign pointed at Dale's garage. Roberta handed Dale a stack of old HOA newsletters and property maps she'd saved. "You've been here 28 years. That garage was built and registered way before the last update to the HOA bylaws. You got something better than a lease agreement. You got grandfathered rights." Dale read the fine print like it was scripture. There it was, clear as daylight. His garage was protected under previous zoning standards, allowing commercial use if established before 2005. He also found a clause that required any HOA board member to disclose conflicts of interest. Brenda, who operated her small logistics business from her home and ran several commercial trucks, had never reported any of that to the board. That's when Dale had an idea. He spent the next few days compiling evidence. Pictures of Brenda's trucks parked illegally around the neighborhood, HOA newsletters where she'd conveniently left out key voting dates, and testimonies from neighbors she had bullied. Dale wasn't looking for revenge, he was building leverage. The sheriff's department agreed to write a letter confirming Dale's official leasing contract and their use of the garage. Roberta, meanwhile, helped organize a quiet community meeting at her home. No HOA oversight. At the meeting, Dale laid it all out. Brenda's selective enforcement, her hidden business activity, her refusal to disclose conflicts, and above all, her ongoing campaign of harassment against a neighbor following every rule. The room, once silent and tense, started buzzing with quiet outrage. Some folks shared their own stories, how Brenda had fined them for lawn height mailbox colors, even Halloween decorations. The neighbors were tired of living in fear of the next arbitrary fine or unannounced visit from Brenda. So, they voted. A petition was drawn up to request an immediate board review and special election. And just like that, the gears of change began turning. Dale didn't expect Brenda to take it well, and he was right. She showed up at his property 2 days later, flanked by her cousin who also sat on the board. She threatened legal action, screamed about conspiracies, and even claimed Dale had installed surveillance on her home. The sheriff's deputy arrived before it could escalate. After reviewing Dale's paperwork and hearing the screaming match from the driveway, the deputy calmly told Brenda she was violating both HOA code and trespassing laws. Brenda left red, faced and sputtering. As she peeled out of the neighborhood, one of her truck tires kicked up a cloud of gravel that pinged off Dale's porch railing. Dale didn't flinch. He just picked up his sweet tea, leaned against the post, and watched the dust settle like a curtain closing after a long, messy act. The tension finally snapped one rainy morning when I woke to find that Brenda had chained both of her trucks together, inside my garage, with a padlock. She wasn't even discreet about it. She left a smug note pinned to the side of my workbench that read, "Since you won't use this space, I'm claiming it as shared community property under Section 14C. Brenda." Her nerve would have been almost impressive if it weren't so illegal. I immediately called Sheriff Davis, and within the hour, he was standing next to me, arms crossed, inspecting the garage. He radioed for backup, and a tow crew was dispatched. But Brenda wasn't going to give up easily. She stormed out of her house in a bathrobe, screaming about theft and community rules. The deputies remained calm. They asked her to produce any documentation or agreement showing she had rights to the garage. She had none. In fact, Sheriff Davis pulled out the lease agreement that listed me as the sole tenant with unrestricted access. They gave her one chance to unlock the trucks. She refused. So the padlock was cut, the trucks were towed, and a formal criminal complaint was filed. That incident turned out to be the tipping point. Word spread across the neighborhood like wildfire. Brenda, the self-appointed rule enforcer, had been caught red-handed violating the very covenants she loved to cite. The HOA board tried to stay neutral at first, but a few brave homeowners began speaking up. Some shared their own horror stories, fines for planters being too colorful, threats over kids' chalk drawings on driveways, surveillance complaints about drones Brenda flew around for inspection purposes. She had made enemies, and now they were finally united. I took it one step further. I invited all interested neighbors to a community meeting on my property in the very garage she had tried to steal. Sheriff Davis attended in uniform, confirming publicly that my lease agreement was legal, enforceable, and exclusive. I showed a presentation highlighting Brenda's pattern of abuse, her misuse of HOA resources, and how she'd selectively enforced rules against people she didn't like. By the end of that night, a petition was drafted, remove Brenda from the board. Within a week, over 80% of homeowners had signed it. Brenda tried to fight it. She filed a formal complaint with the HOA legal consultant, but they threw it out. She hired a lawyer, but even that backfired when it was revealed she'd misrepresented her own property lines years ago to avoid landscaping fees. Her credibility was gone. Eventually, she was forced to resign. The board, now newly composed of more reasonable residents, sent me a letter of apology, something I never expected. I didn't need the apology, though. I already had everything I needed, my garage back, my dignity intact, and a community that finally stood up for itself. I still lease the garage to the sheriff's department. It's quieter now. People wave when they drive by. Brenda sold her house a few months later. Rumor has it she tried to run for an HOA board in a retirement village across town. Some people never learn, but the rest of us did, and we're better for it. The sun had barely risen when Dale stepped outside, a thermos of strong black coffee in one hand and his county lease contract in the other. Brenda's trucks were still in his garage like two stubborn squatters refusing to leave, but this morning felt different. Dale wasn't just reacting anymore, he was planning. The sheriff had called him the night before, chuckling as he confirmed a patrol car would be parked in the driveway at all hours until this matter was resolved legally. Brenda wouldn't be able to step near the garage without facing law enforcement now. Dale took comfort in that but knew it wasn't over. Brenda had gone quiet, and in Dale's experience, that silence was always the storm's eye. Later that afternoon, a manila envelope slid under his front door. Inside was a letter from the HOA legal counsel citing a list of false violations, unauthorized commercial activity, exterior modifications without approval, and a supposed safety hazard due to vehicle storage. It was laughable on paper but infuriating in principle. Dale knew exactly what Brenda was doing, burying him in paperwork and hoping he'd fold. But Dale wasn't built that way. That evening, he dug into every HOA bylaw he had, cross-referencing them with property plats and dated records. He found his ace buried deep, a clause from 1982 that exempted his property from several restrictions due to its grandfathered status. It had been used once by the previous owner to fight a landscaping dispute and had held up in court. With this, Brenda's entire argument was toast. Dale scanned the document and emailed it to the sheriff and his attorney. Then he poured himself a glass of iced tea and sat on the porch, watching as a county truck pulled into the driveway. An officer stepped out, notepad in hand, and knocked on Brenda's door. She opened it with a smirk that melted into disbelief as the officer handed her a citation for illegal parking on county leased property. She argued, of course, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, but it didn't matter. The law was clear. The officer told her she had 48 hours to remove the trucks or face impound and daily fines. Dale didn't gloat. He didn't have to. The look on Brenda's face was reward enough, but he knew it wouldn't stop her. People like Brenda didn't back down. They just shifted tactics. That night, Dale heard the distinct sound of tires deflating. He rushed out and saw that both the sheriff's cruiser and his own truck had been slashed. It was too calculated to be random, and there were no cameras on that side of the property. Dale filed a report, but evidence was scarce. Still, it gave him an idea. The next morning, Dale met with the sheriff at a local diner and laid out a proposal. Expand the lease agreement to include not just the garage, but the surrounding property line. The sheriff agreed, seeing the benefit of increased presence in the neighborhood. By noon, new signage had been posted, restricted county vehicle zone, no trespassing. Brenda stormed out, screaming about harassment, but it was too late. Dale had moved first, and now she was boxed in. Her trucks were towed within the hour, and her HOA allies started to backpedal. Dale had changed the rules of the game. He didn't just defend himself. He made his land untouchable. And in a war of persistence, Dale Hensley was just getting warmed up. The day after the community meeting, I woke up to the sight of a moving crew outside Brenda's house. At first, I thought she might be relocating, or maybe the trucks were finally being removed from my property. But no, Brenda wasn't moving, she was upgrading. A massive new shed was being installed on her lot, the kind that violated 3 separate HOA bylaws due to height, design, and proximity to the property line. Yet no notice was sent, and not a single HOA board member came to inspect it. I watched silently from my porch, sipping my coffee, while the hypocrisy played out in broad daylight. I took a few photos. Then I called in a city inspector, not under my name, of course, just a concerned anonymous resident. That afternoon, I received another notice from the HOA. Brenda had reported unlawful surveillance, accusing me of violating her privacy for photographing the trucks on my own property. I couldn't help but chuckle. The woman had parked in my garage, got caught doing it, and now claimed to be the victim. I drafted a calm but pointed letter in response, attaching the legal lease agreement with the county sheriff's department, the previous photos of the truck, and a copy of my property's grandfathered zoning documents. I see the sheriff's office for good measure. The very next day, 2 county deputies showed up at my garage again, this time not to park, but to investigate. They were looking into whether Brenda's trucks had been involved in recent complaints of illegal dumping and unpermitted storage. Turns out her vehicles weren't just oversized, they were carrying banned materials for her so-called landscaping business, which had never been registered in the state. The sheriff's office launched an investigation. Brenda, of course, tried to deflect. She claimed I had set her up, even though all the violations were easily proven through vehicle records and HOA security footage. By the end of the week, Brenda's trucks were gone, hauled off by a towing service under a court-ordered warrant, and that massive shed she had just installed, slapped with a violation and a mandatory removal notice by the city. I didn't have to lift a finger. It was all set in motion by the very laws Brenda had weaponized against me. The HOA board, silent, not a single apology, but the neighbors noticed. More people started showing up to meetings, some of them I hadn't seen participate in years. There was a shift in the air. People weren't afraid of Brenda anymore. They saw through her act. And just when things started to quiet down, Brenda made one last desperate move. She filed a lawsuit against me and the HOA, claiming defamation, harassment, and intentional emotional distress. It was laughable. My lawyer, who had been following the saga closely, made quick work of it. We filed a counter-suit for property invasion, false reporting, and malicious intent. And with the sheriff's department on my side, plus all the public documents and security footage in hand, her case was dismissed in less than 2 weeks. But something happened in that courtroom that surprised even me. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for cutting through HOA drama, issued Brenda a warning. She said, "If I see you back in this courtroom with another petty complaint, you won't be walking away with just court fees. You'll be facing sanctions." That marked the turning point. Brenda wasn't the same after that. She kept to herself. No more passive-aggressive lawn signs. No more fake complaints. The trucks were gone, the shed dismantled, and the HOA board, sensing a shift in community sentiment, finally began reconsidering its enforcement procedures. They even asked me to serve as an informal consultant on property rights interpretation. I politely declined, but I agreed to sit in on the next election process as an observer, because sometimes the best way to deal with tyrants isn't just to fight back. It's to outlast them, and by then I had won. Brenda had underestimated the strength of small town loyalty, and Dale was about to prove it. When the HOA issued yet another baseless fine, this time citing community endangerment due to increased law enforcement traffic, Dale didn't bother getting angry. Instead, he invited the sheriff's department over for a full cookout in his front yard. Uniformed officers, deputies, and even a few county judges showed up, chatting with neighbors, tossing beanbags, and handing out badge stickers to kids. The scene was a bold public statement. Dale wasn't just protected, he was respected. Brenda, peering out from behind her curtain, looked pale as she dialed her phone, no doubt trying to reach the HOA president. But nobody answered. They were at the cookout too. The next day, Brenda tried a different tactic. She called in a towing company to remove unauthorized vehicles from Dale's driveway, but when the tow truck arrived, the driver recognized one of the cruisers as belonging to his cousin. He refused to touch it. Brenda was left yelling in the street as the tow truck drove off without loading a single car. Dale watched from his porch, sipping sweet tea. He didn't need to say a word. Word of Brenda's antics spread beyond the neighborhood. Local news picked up the story, framing it as a humorous clash between HOA rules and county authority. Dale, smiling but calm, gave a brief interview explaining the situation. He never said Brenda's name, but she knew. Her phone started ringing with reporters asking for her side of the story, and HOA leadership realized they were in a PR nightmare. The final blow came when the HOA president showed up at Dale's house, not with a complaint, but a peace offering, a formal retraction of all fines, a commitment to respect his lease with the sheriff's office, and a written promise that no further action would be taken regarding law enforcement presence on the property. Dale accepted, but he made sure the sheriff notarized every page of the agreement. Brenda's influence in the neighborhood crumbled. People stopped waving at her. Someone started a petition to bar her from the HOA board. Dale, meanwhile, continued his quiet life, renting the garage, tuning the occasional classic car, and keeping his porch stocked with extra lawn chairs for visiting deputies. The garage that had once caused so much strife became a local symbol of resistance not just against Brenda, but against overreach and bullying in general. Dale never gloated. He didn't need to. The truth had done the talking for him. And that was enough. As autumn rolled in, the neighborhood grew quieter. The air was crisper, the leaves began to change, and the chaos Brenda once stirred seemed to dissolve into the wind. But Dale knew better than to assume it was over. People like Brenda didn't give up. They retreated, they waited, they recalculated. He kept one eye on her house, lights on at odd hours, strange visitors stopping by, quiet whispers exchanged in the driveway. Something was brewing. Then came the letter. Unlike the official HOA mailings, this envelope was unmarked, slid into Dale's mailbox without postage, written in shaky cursive. It read like a threat disguised as concern. Some people, it warned, still remember what this community was before outsiders changed it. Dale chuckled, then tucked it under a magnet on his fridge like a bad joke. He didn't even bring it up to the sheriff. Let them watch, let them worry. A week later, two unfamiliar men in suits knocked on his door. Dale didn't answer right away. He watched from his front window as they paced on his porch, clearly nervous, their ties flapping in the breeze. When he finally opened the door, he did so with his phone in one hand already recording. The taller man introduced them as private investigators contracted by a concerned citizen who believed Dale was illegally operating a business out of his home. Dale laughed out loud. He asked if they'd like to speak with the county sheriff, whose patrol cruiser happened to be parked directly in the driveway at that moment. The suits politely declined and left in a hurry. 2 days later, Dale received a visit from the sheriff, himself not about the investigators, but with news. Apparently, Brenda had filed multiple complaints with the county office, all dismissed, but now she was pushing at the state level, trying to claim Dale's lease with law enforcement violated some obscure zoning ordinance. The sheriff assured him it wouldn't stick, but it was clear Brenda was escalating. Dale made a decision. He called in a favor not from law enforcement, but from the local veterans club. His father had served, and Dale had always contributed to the annual fundraiser. That weekend, his property became the site of a charity event. Classic cars on display, flags flying high, veterans and their families enjoying grilled food and sharing stories. Media outlets showed up again, this time painting Dale as a patriotic citizen facing harassment for supporting public service. Brenda, for the first time, stayed completely out of sight. The next HOA meeting was different. Dale showed up not alone, but flanked by uniformed officers, veterans, and neighbors. When Brenda tried to speak, the room didn't quiet. Instead, it buzzed with quiet disapproval. The HOA president barely acknowledged her before announcing new bylaw revisions, ones that protected homeowners renting to government agencies and outlawed retaliatory investigations. Brenda stood, red in the face, and walked out. Dale didn't say anything. He just stayed seated, hands folded, watching her leave, and in that moment, everyone knew the tide had turned for good. No more sneaky tactics, no more concerned letters. Brenda's grip on the neighborhood had finally broken. Dale Hensley stood outside the county courthouse, a thick folder tucked under one arm and a small smirk on his face. He hadn't come to fight today, not really. He came to settle, and not with the HOA, but with the law itself. The clerk at the counter raised an eyebrow as he filed the motion. Brenda had failed to mention in her complaint that Dale had officially subleased the garage space to the sheriff's department in a formal, notarized agreement. What she also failed to realize was that this agreement held legal weight. Brenda may have thought she could make Dale bend through HOA fines and public embarrassment, but Dale was playing a longer, smarter game. Back at the neighborhood, the tension was so thick it could choke a bull. Rumors swirled. Brenda had tried to push Dale out because she wanted full access to the lot, maybe even convert it into a paid commercial parking space for her husband's contracting company. That would have required full HOA approval, which she was secretly maneuvering toward, using Dale as her stepping stone. But now, her scheme was coming undone. Dale had submitted the sheriff's lease to the county, who were now investigating whether Brenda's interference amounted to tampering with government equipment. The trucks she parked in Dale's garage were now technically parked on government, leased property without authorization. Dale didn't even have to speak at the HOA board meeting that week. Sheriff Collins did it for him. He walked in full uniform, placed a report on the table, and simply said, "The county doesn't appreciate people messing with our property. Consider this a formal warning." The silence in the room was deafening. Brenda tried to defend herself, but every excuse made her sound more unstable. The board was already spooked. Several members were quietly grateful Dale had kept the sheriff close. They didn't want this mess to go any deeper. They voted to suspend Brenda from board duties pending investigation. But Dale wasn't finished, not yet. He had one more surprise. A neighbor, quiet old Mrs. Flannery, stepped forward with security footage from her back porch camera. It showed Brenda removing the padlock from Dale's garage late at night and replacing it with her own. Not only that, but she was caught moving items from Dale's side storage area into her own basement. That sealed it. Now it wasn't just HOA harassment. Now it was theft. Sheriff Collins personally issued a citation, and Dale filed a restraining order the next morning. Suddenly, the neighborhood that once viewed Dale as a cranky retired mechanic began to see him differently. He was the guy who stood his ground, knew the law better than the ones pretending to enforce it, and stayed calm under pressure. Parents waved to him more often. A few even asked if he'd consider running for the board next election. Dale didn't answer. He was too busy fixing up his truck, finally getting to repaint that old red Ford that had been sitting in the back. Life was quiet again, for now, but Dale knew better than to think it would stay that way. Not with Brenda living 2 doors down, and not with an HOA like this one. The war wasn't over. It had just entered a new phase. Dale sat on his front porch, a fresh mug of coffee in hand, and the first real smile he'd worn in weeks beginning to stretch across his face. The sun was peeking out from behind the clouds, bathing his property in golden light. Peace, finally. The sheriff's department was fully settled into the garage again. The 2 county cruisers parked where Brenda's trucks had once been jammed. The new sheriff had personally thanked Dale for his patience during the drama and assured him the lease would be extended long-term, but the real victory wasn't in contracts or fines. It was in the support Dale had earned from the community. After Brenda's board resignation and the public HOA meeting, things shifted. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now stopped by more frequently, waving, even bringing over baked goods or fresh vegetables. Dale's once quiet property had become a gathering place for conversation, laughter, and occasionally strategy. Because the HOA board, though rattled, wasn't entirely quiet. A few members still clung to their power, hoping the drama would blow over. Dale didn't let down his guard. He began attending every HOA meeting, often with the sheriff's liaison seated beside him. They'd speak calmly and confidently, citing laws and codes with such precision that even the most stubborn board members were left speechless. Brenda, on the other hand, had become somewhat of a pariah. Her trucks were gone, and so was her authority. She'd been forced to pay the full cost of repairs for Dale's garage door. And it turned out her commercial trucking business was under investigation due to zoning complaints Dale had filed months earlier. Karma, it seemed, had arrived in full force, yet Dale didn't revel in revenge. His satisfaction came from restoring order, from standing up to unjust authority and proving that no one, not even a rogue board member, could push him around. One evening, as he stood under the warm glow of the garage lights, looking at the smooth concrete floor and the crisp lines of the sheriff's equipment, Dale felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not just in his property, but in his ability to endure. This was his land, his legacy, and no one was going to take that from him. He took a deep breath of the cool night air, the sounds of cicadas humming in the background. The battle might be over, but Dale was still standing tall, and ready, if ever again, to fight for what was his. Months passed, and the neighborhood slowly settled into a quieter rhythm. The chaos, the board power plays, and the illegal truck invasions became stories people whispered about at backyard barbecues and HOA meetings, like legends from a time when things spiraled out of control. But for Dale, it wasn't just a story, it had been war, and he had come out the other side not just intact, but stronger. The garage, once a battleground, now stood proudly under the soft glow of floodlights. It bore no scars from the ordeal, only upgrades, reinforced doors, fresh security cameras, a new keypad system installed by the sheriff's office as a thank you for Dale's unwavering cooperation. Inside, the county's vehicles sat in perfect order, surrounded by shelves of emergency supplies and patrol equipment. It was no longer just a leased space, it was a symbol of what happens when you stand your ground. Brenda, the once feared and micromanaging HOA queen, had sold her home quietly, slipping out of the neighborhood like a shadow in the night. No farewell, no explanation. Her dream of empire, building through HOA power, collapsed in the face of public humiliation, legal action, and Dale's relentless pursuit of accountability. Dale never once gloated. He didn't need to. He had something better: peace. He spent his mornings walking his property line, coffee in one hand, the other trailing along the new fence he'd installed. Stronger, taller, legal. His neighbors waved with more respect now. Not fear, not obligation, just a kind of neighborly honor earned only by those who had the courage to challenge injustice and win. On weekends, kids from the block came by to fish in the pond or help Dale tend to his garden. He even opened up a small workshop in his garage side room, teaching basic carpentry and mechanics to anyone interested. From tension came community, from battle came trust. Dale looked back on it all not with anger, but with clarity. This wasn't just about a garage, it was about principle, about reminding people that property lines aren't just measured in feet, they're built from boundaries of respect, that a home is more than a house, it's a promise to protect what's yours. And now Dale had fulfilled that promise, fully, quietly, with no need to shout, only to live. One crisp autumn evening, as he sat on the same porch where this fight had begun, he watched the sheriff's cruiser pull out of the garage, lights flickering once before fading down the road. Dale smiled, not because there was action, but because there wasn't. For the first time in a long time, nothing was happening, and that, finally, was exactly how it should be.